So this question of an ethic of interfaith cooperation actually calls us to think about where our roots are. And as a non-religious person, while I do have these connections to the relationships that I've built with people from different religious traditions, I was actually also looking internally and where I was raised and how that's influenced where I am now. And I think something that I realized in that process was that roots not only came from my childhood, but roots have been, I think, being instilled with me throughout my process of being an interfaith leader on campus and now in a community where I'm still figuring out what my ethic of interfaith cooperation is. It's very much a process, and I don't have a clear definition or understanding of that. But I think the space of an interfaith community gives me room to continually build upon that and develop who it is that I am becoming throughout this interfaith work.
I have maintained a theology of interfaith cooperation based on two sides of a coin: service to others and prayer. And combining those two together with other people, I think, has allowed me to tap into a very deep base of inspiration and action from my own faith life and from the lives of those around me too. This work is best done with others because it allows you to learn more about yourself and about the people around you. I've been driven since a young age by the idea from my faith tradition that we are drawn to repair things in a world that is in often dreadful need of repair, whether that's helping others, helping our families or our communities. That drive to fix things was hammered into me from a very young age, and it has guided a lot of my work since then. It's always moving towards service toward others as a way to both live out my own faith tradition and to be useful in the world, because I really like being a useful person. And promoting interfaith engagement and interfaith social cooperation for the common good is a keen way to achieve that.
So in Islam, there's a lot of verses from the Quran and from Prophet Muhammad that say that diversity is intentional. So if Allah wanted to, he would have created all of mankind as one religion or one community. But he intentionally did not do that. And the reason is so we can kind of learn from each other's traditions. And that's something I want to kind of input in my own life. The United States is pretty diverse. I mean, everyone you meet, even if they're the same religion, is going to believe different things. So it's kind of up to us to explore that diversity and learn more about it. And also, there's so many examples in Muslim history of how different traditions have coexisted together. I feel that's something that might be missing nowadays. And I think it's important for us to kind of realize there's diversity in both within the tradition and outside of the tradition, and how we can learn from each of those things.
In Hinduism, there's this idea of Om Ano Bhadraha, which comes from a scripture that means let good thoughts come from all directions. And Hinduism is not a particular religion with a set of doctrines, and it's more of a worldview and actually a culture. And so if you look at the history of India and the history of the Hindu faith, you will see that there have been many different people that have come across the world to India, whether they were Muslims, Christians, even Jews. And so that philosophically has grounded me. I've always felt very comfortable learning from and talking to people of different religious backgrounds, because Hinduism is very open. There is no one God that you have to worship. There's three main ideas that this then drives. And we call it Gnan, Karma, and Bhakti. Gnan means knowledge, Karma means action, and Bhakti means devotion. So if I truly believe that God resides in all, regardless of faith, regardless of ethnicity, race, nationality, that idea, that knowledge fuels me to try to understand the person for who they are within. Again, the divinity that resides within. With karma, with action, that then propels you to perform selfless action. Because if you are believing that God resides in me and that same God resides in others, you are then trying to serve others, not because they're poor or inferior or for whatever ism that is out there, but simply because there's a God that resides within them. And you're trying to selflessly serve the God that's in you and that is in them. And the last one is bhakti, or devotion. And again, that idea of an indwelling God compels you to build a relationship with that person, a selfless relationship. So because of like that dynamic idea of Hinduism in the strand that I follow of that indwelling God, you are now compelled to build personal relationships that are based on selfless ideas and to serve others selflessly.
What I see are two prevailing models of interfaith cooperation, or what I would call interreligious cooperation. On the one hand, there is a model that seeks to surface or celebrate the similarities between different religious traditions. And so it looks at how can I, for example, as maybe a Buddhist, and how can you as a Jew agree on certain topics that we see as particularly important content-wise. Perhaps maybe a better example is an initiative such as a Common Word, where they had Muslims and Christians say that based on A, their love of God, and B, their love of neighbor, they were going to prioritize cooperation and getting to know one another and living together in a respectful, peaceful society. And so that's one way of approaching the question of interreligious cooperation, finding similarities of content of belief or practice, but often belief, and saying, okay, because we believe a similar thing, we can get along. I then see another model that really focuses on difference and says, actually, what's most important to us, we should celebrate difference. We can learn from one another based on our differences. And we shouldn't try to paper over the differences. We should focus on those first. And through focusing on those differences of, again, more of a content-wise of belief, that's where we can learn to grow deeper in our religious traditions. That's where we can grow to understand what actually separates us from the quote-unquote other without demonizing one another. And I think both of those types of interreligious engagement or cooperation are extremely important. What I try to focus on in my life is, instead of looking at similarities or differences in belief in content, I try to somewhat find a middle way, which is looking at how people construct their religious identities, looking at moving beyond the assumption that we should focus primarily on beliefs to explore how I actually construct religious identity in my own life, and then explore differences in the actual construction of religious identity itself.
There is a verse in the Quran, it's Surah 49, verse 13, that says, "O humankind, we have created you from a male and a female into nations and tribes so that you may know one another, and the best of you is the one who is most God-conscious." And so that you may know one another and compete in good work. And for me, the wording of this verse is so critical, because God is not addressing Muslims, God is not addressing Arabs, God is addressing mankind. The world, mankind was created from just these two people, Adam and Eve, and that the fact that we are, having multiple races, religions, ethnicities, is actually a mercy. It's considered a mercy and a blessing to learn about one another, to share your own views, and to educate one another, to have this appreciative knowledge of other people's histories and backgrounds, and that you should work together. And the best of you is not even the person who is a Muslim. Like, the word is not Muslim. The word is God-conscious. And, to me, that is so profound, that I'm actually commanded by God to know other people, to develop an appreciative knowledge of other people's backgrounds, and then to work with them to make the world a better place.
From Sikhism, I have Chardi Kala, which is relentless optimism, and Sarbatta Bhala, which means the welfare of all creation. And it's this idea that regardless of what we go through in our lives, we are to accept it as good. Jo prab kino so pal manyo is what we would say. And in that process, we begin to see that life is not always positive, life is not always fruitful, but at the same time, if we continue to see that things will get better, that there's light at the end of the path, then we'll continue to go down a path of righteousness. And from the Hindu tradition, I abide by something known as Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that the universe is our entire family. Both those faith traditions have this idea that the will of God exists within all of creation, and that it's manifest and it's our responsibility, more importantly, to make sure that we not only help ourselves, but the world around us.
What inspires me from my faith tradition is sort of a commitment to service. Muslims are encouraged to live their life not just in service to God, but also in service to the community that God has kind of put in front of them. And so that's sort of always been one of my number one motivations. Whenever I think about doing anything in my life, it's always with the question of how does it serve my community and indirectly then serve God. So Islam does not actually discriminate when it comes to service to your community. Your community is your community, whatever, whichever part of the world that you were placed in. And you are encouraged and in fact, some would say mandated to give back to your local community as opposed to, especially if you're like an immigrant, as opposed to abroad and things like that.
As I've thought a lot about, how this country was created, it was created on the foundation that we should be open to the ideas of others, that we should engage with others. The Constitution, in my faith, we believe that it was divinely inspired to allow people to have different ideas of faith and to allow faith to develop individually so that we don't have constraints on government to decide what we should believe and what we shouldn't and how we should enact that belief. So on a very basic level, I believe that this country is a country of freedom and interfaith. And because of that, I think it makes it that much easier to serve and love those around us if we're willing to then step outside of ourselves and our own understanding and reach out to those around us.